Hello and welcome. I'm Ryan Clark, the Oregon State Beavers beat writer for the Oregonian, and you're listening to Beavers Beat, a short-form podcast keeping you in the loop on everything Oregon State sports. Oregon State versus Fresno State is already fast approaching. It won't be a late night for Beavers fans like last week's game against Cal, which kicked off a little after 7:40, as kickoff is scheduled for 12:30 p.m. Saturday afternoon at Reser Stadium, game airing on the CW this week. It could be a long night for Beavers fans, though, if the team plays poorly again and falls to 0-2 on the season. With those games on the road at Texas Tech and Oregon coming up in the next 2 weeks, this is a must-win for OSU to avoid a potential 0-4 start. The Beavers will likely be without one of their top defensive backs once again this week against Fresno State. After Coach Trent Bray refused to comment on his status twice last week, we reported this week that sophomore Exodus Ayers has been accused of domestic violence by a former girlfriend. Catherine Daniela Rodriguez alleges Ayers physically abused her during their 7-month relationship, which she said ended in May. She has filed a police report with the Corvallis Police Department and was granted a temporary stalking protective order in early August, meaning Ayers is not allowed to contact her. Rodriguez is claiming physical abuse, which initially came about in a TikTok video she posted in late July, which has over 10 million views, along with alleged threats via text message and Ayers allegedly sending sexually explicit photos and videos of her to his OSU football teammates without her consent. A hearing is scheduled for Monday on whether to grant Rodriguez the stalking protective order permanently, and the claims of domestic violence are currently under investigation by the Corvallis Police Department. On the field, we have several preview stories online now for the Fresno State game. You can visit OregonLive.com for further previews of the game coming up, and obviously for more reporting as things develop with the Exodus Ayers situation. Moving on to some listener questions, we also have a mailbag story up right now on OregonLive.com. And obviously, given the active nature of the OSU fan base, we couldn't get to all of them, and we'll address 5 more questions here on the podcast. Thanks to everybody for submitting them. And if you want to submit more questions for the mailbag, feel free to do so. Email me at rclark@oregonian.com. That's Clark with an E. This is the Mailbag Overflow. When it comes to analytics and the analytics tell you to go for 2 down 21, does Trent Bray agree with the analytics to go for 2 or agree with the book to kick a PAT? Writes James Lee on X. I was confused by the decision by the Beavers to go for 2 on that touchdown down 21. I'm not sure the difference between being down 19 and being down 20 at that point, other than maybe you feel like if you do score 20 straight points, you'd rather be a point ahead at the end than obviously tied. But that's a long way off, and you put yourself in a more difficult position going for 2 and not getting it. Obviously, there were other decisions made in that game that folks questioned, including obviously the mistake on special teams early in the game with 12 players on the field, a mistake that Bray and company talked a lot about this week as something that they really wanted to do better on and were frankly embarrassed by, and it changed the game. They were down 14-0 after a certain point in the first quarter, and things were tough going for the Beavers going from there. Another decision that folks talked about this week, too, was the one to punt down 14 in the fourth quarter. A lot of folks thought that was the Beavers waving the white flag in a game they still had a chance to come back in. The Beavers haven't addressed that specific decision, but those sorts of decisions are the kind of thing that we'll definitely keep an eye on in the weeks to come. Tyler Stobby writes on X, this is more of a podcast-oriented question, which is good since this is the podcast. Did the Beavers' performance last night eliminate any spark of hope the fan base was holding on to? The diehard fans will hang on, but I feel like a lot of the, quote, wait and see portion of the fan base saw the game and said, new year, but same old story. I think that there are certainly people who will be very discouraged by the results of the first game. And people might tune out as well, because it's a tough time to be an Oregon State fan right now. And when you look at the effort that OSU put in that first game, you might be turned off to watching for a while, especially with how tough the next few games are going to go. But I don't think that it eliminates any spark of hope that the fan base was holding on to. And the reason I say that is if Oregon State wins this Fresno game, they lose the games they're expected to lose against Texas Tech and Oregon. There is still a chance for the Beavers to have a really strong finish to the season, given the ease of their schedule. Now, that's easy to say because on paper, quote unquote, the Beavers are better than the teams that they have scheduled down that stretch, and they could easily underwhelm as they did against Cal. But I think the hope is still there, and I think the schedule lends itself to that. I think the opportunity for a Beavers team that's more talented than it was last year to finish stronger is definitely still there. So I wouldn't abandon all hope just yet if I was an Oregon State fan. Ed Helinski writes on X, in your opinion, what are you liking about this team so far and what needs significant work? The Beavers would be the first to admit that there is a lot that needs significant work when it comes to this team and comparing it to the Cal game. But I don't think the Cal game is by any means a full-blown litmus test for every aspect of this team's makeup. Every coach will tell you that the biggest leap that a team takes in a season is between weeks 1 and 2. And if that happens for Oregon State this week, I think they will showcase their talent more accurately on both sides of the ball. Defensively, I think that, baked into what was a really rough game against Cal was a stretch where I think the Beavers settled into the game defensively and looked like a cohesive unit, despite the absences on the interior defensive line with Tavita Pomee, who may play this week against Fresno State. He's day-to-day. And with the absence, obviously, of Exodus Ayers in the secondary, it looked like Trey Glasper held his own pretty well as a true freshman, and that's something that coaches were excited about this week. So I'm liking that. I'm liking the flashes there. The offense feels like it has much further to go, and that is the case for any team in the course of a season. The defense is typically ahead of the offense, but Malik Murphy was frustrated. Everybody saw it on TV. That was a product of the OSU offense really not living up to its own expectations. They couldn't really run the ball with any kind of threat. Anthony Hankerson had 15 carries for 42 yards and that one touchdown on the Wildcat formation. Not enough from the run game, and certainly from the pass game, they were chasing the game the whole way and had to force it in ways they might not otherwise have. Trent Walker was really the only guy that was a consistent threat for them through the air. They need other people to step up. I know that it's obviously hard for them without Darius Clemens, who is sure to be that number 2 option for the Beavers and maybe even occasionally the number 1 option at wide receiver. But Eddie Freoff had a great camp. David Wells had a great camp. Those guys need to step into bigger roles in this game against Fresno State in order to balance out this OSU offense and make life easier for Malik Murphy. Former Angry Beav on X writes, at this point, why shouldn't we just shutter the program? We're never going to win a national championship. Hell, we will almost certainly never make the CFP. I don't care about the financials behind keeping football afloat. As an alum, this is unwatchable. I'm done with OSU. Former Angry Beav sounds like current Angry Beav, and certainly, I think, understandably Angry Beav, given how week 1 went and, the position that Oregon State finds itself in relative to the national college football landscape. But they're not going to shutter the program. And I'm sure that's hyperbole in this question, but it would not benefit anybody in the athletic department for them to shutter the football program. Football is the biggest revenue generator by far, even at the schools like Oregon State that don't have as much success as maybe the Powers do. It bankrolls pretty much everything else. You got men's basketball and women's basketball that are revenue generators as well. Baseball obviously is important to Oregon State fans. All 3 of those sports and the sports outside of them would suffer by football not being part of Oregon State's fold. And that would be an admission of defeat that, frankly, I don't think anybody in this athletic department is interested in, and that's not even really a possibility. Last one from James Lee on X. When you have two tight ends getting paid $250K each, why did your OC not target these guys at all in your first game? Can't confirm that number in terms of those guys' payments regarding NIL, but it was somewhat confounding to not see the tight ends get used more in that game against Cal. Obviously, Cal has a pretty stout defense, and they game planned really well against Oregon State, but I expected a lot more from Bryce Caulfield and from Riley Williams in that game. We didn't see much of Williams. Not sure if he was hurt or, what things are looking like for him there. But Caulfield was a guy that had a great camp and is a genuine receiving threat at tight end. So if they're not going to use those guys when you're already short on receivers, that's only going to make things more difficult for Malik Murphy. So, for the Beavers' sake, I'm sure a lot of fans would like to see more usage of the tight ends in the coming weeks. For more news and analysis ahead of OSU versus Fresno State, visit OregonLive.com/Beavers. You can follow me on Twitter/X and on Blue Sky at Ryan T. Clark. And be sure to submit your questions for the weekly Oregon State mailbag, either on social media or again via email at rclark@oregonian.com. Thanks for joining us.